On a low, wide plantation near the tidal rivers of South Carolina, life was measured in rows and seasons. Cotton by the acre, tobacco by the weight, and enslaved people by usefulness. Among them was a woman the overseer rarely addressed by name. In the ledger, she was recorded simply as female, productive. Her name was Hannah. No one remembered the day she arrived. There was no story about her purchase, no dramatic arrival whispered in the quarters. By the time most people noticed her, she had already been folded into the rhythm of the place, working, enduring, disappearing into routine. But there was one thing that set her apart. Every year, without exception, Hannah gave birth. The plantation noticed before the people did. The overseer's books showed it clearly. One child added each year, marked neatly beside her assigned number. When cotton yields fell, births were still recorded. When prices rose or dropped, Hannah's body remained consistent. A child every year. Not by accident. Not by chance. The older women in the quarters counted quietly at first. One winter birth. One summer birth. Another spring child taken away before it learned to speak. After a while they stopped counting aloud. Some things felt dangerous to name. Hannah never spoke about it. She worked through early pregnancy and late pregnancy alike, bent low in the fields until her back screamed and her breath shortened. When the time came, she was sent back to the quarters, where another enslaved woman acted as midwife, not because the plantation cared, but because a dead mother meant lost property. Within weeks, sometimes days, Hannah returned to work. The babies rarely stayed long enough for names to settle. Some were taken south to harsher plantations. Some were sold north, closer to towns. Some vanished into nearby counties, never spoken of again. Hannah was never told where they went. She learned not to ask. As the years passed, the language around her changed. The overseer stopped referring to her children as children. They were stock. Increase. Returns. The mistress of the house once commented, in polite company, that Hannah was remarkably reliable. Hannah stood in the doorway, holding a broom, listening as if the words belonged to someone else. At night, in the quarters, other mothers slept curled around their children. Hannah slept curled around memory. She pressed her palms into the dirt floor and counted years the way others counted scars. One pregnancy. One loss. Another pregnancy. Another absence. By the time Hannah reached her late 20s, something inside her hardened, not into bitterness but into control. She learned how to survive by narrowing her world. She did not imagine futures. She did not picture her children grown. She did not allow herself hope. Hope, she had learned, was something the plantation punished. Then came the year that felt different. It was not pain that warned her. Pain had long stopped being useful as a signal. It was the silence. This child did not move the way the others had. There were no frantic kicks late at night, no restless shifting when Hannah tried to sleep. The stillness followed her into the fields, into the quarters, into her breath. The older women noticed too. This one listens, one whispered. This one waits, another murmured. Hannah said nothing. She placed her hands over her stomach and prayed, not for freedom, not even for survival, but for understanding. The night of the birth arrived without ceremony. No storm. No sudden cold. Just heavy air pressing down on the quarters as if the land itself was watching. The midwife worked silently, her hands steady from years of practice. When the child finally emerged, there was no immediate cry. The silence stretched. Hannah's chest tightened. She had known loss before, too well. She closed her eyes, already bracing for it. Then the cry came. Not loud. Not frantic. But steady. The midwife froze. She had delivered dozens of children on that plantation. She had seen sickness, weakness, deformity. She had seen babies born already halfway gone. This was different. This one, she said slowly, this one is looking. The child opened its eyes. And did not look away. Hannah felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not fear. Not relief. Recognition. The child's gaze was calm. Focused. As if it were measuring the world it had entered rather than reacting to it. Hannah pulled the baby closer, her hands trembling, not from weakness but from the sudden weight of something she had avoided for years. Attachment. Outside, the plantation bell rang, calling workers to the fields as it always did. Life moved forward without pause. Inside the cabin, Hannah held her child and understood, without knowing how, that this birth would not follow the same path as the others. This child would not disappear quietly into a ledger. This child would ask questions the plantation was not prepared to answer. And for the first time in her life, Hannah allowed herself to wonder, not what would be taken from her next, but what might finally refuse to be taken at all. The change had begun quietly. The plantation did not notice the difference at first. It rarely did. Children were born often enough that another infant in the quarters meant little. The overseer's ledger accepted the new entry without hesitation. A number, a date, a mark beside Hannah's name. But within weeks, the older women began to whisper. This child did not cry the way the others had. Not in hunger. Not in fear. Not when left alone longer than was kind. The baby watched. When Hannah worked, the child's eyes followed her movements across the small cabin. When other children stumbled and shouted outside, this one stayed quiet, observing. The stillness unsettled the women who had learned to read danger in patterns. "He don't sleep like normal babies," one woman said softly. "He don't fuss," said another. "Like he's listening." Hannah said nothing. She had learned that attention, good or bad, could become dangerous quickly. She kept the child close, fed him when she could, and returned to work sooner than her body wanted. The plantation demanded it. Days passed, then weeks, and then something happened that Hannah could not ignore. The child began to speak early. Not words at first, but sounds, focused sounds, imitations of the voices around him. He repeated tones, rhythms, patterns. When Hannah spoke, he watched her mouth closely, as if learning not just language but intent. By the time most children on the plantation were still babbling, this one spoke single, careful words. And he asked questions. Why? Where? Who? Questions were dangerous. Questions meant noticing. And noticing was not encouraged among the enslaved. Hannah tried to quiet him gently. She pressed her finger to his lips, whispered warnings meant more for the walls than for him. But the child seemed to understand restraint without fear. He did not rebel. He waited. The overseer noticed him during an inspection. He stood near Hannah's cabin, scanning faces as usual, when the child looked directly at him. Not with the wide-eyed fear overseers expected, but with calm curiosity. The man paused. "What's wrong with that one?" he muttered. The question was not concern. It was suspicion. "He's quiet," someone said. "Too quiet," the overseer replied. From that day on, the child was watched. Not constantly, not openly, but watched. Hannah felt it in the way conversations stopped when she approached. In the way the overseer lingered near her work assignments. In the way the mistress glanced at the child during Sunday gatherings with a look that was neither kindness nor cruelty, but calculation. The plantation valued productivity, strength, obedience. This child did not fit cleanly into any of those categories. By the time he reached 6 years old, he could remember things most adults could not. He recalled routes between fields, schedules of work, patterns of movement. He listened to conversations not meant for him and repeated them later with unsettling accuracy. The other children followed him without knowing why. He did not lead them loudly. He did not challenge authority. He simply noticed things, and others began to notice with him. Hannah feared what this meant. She had survived by being unremarkable, by being counted and forgotten. Her body had been useful, her mind invisible. Her son was neither. The turning point came during a sale. A group of traders arrived one humid afternoon, boots heavy with dust, voices loud with negotiation. Families were lined up. Children clung to skirts. Names dissolved into prices. Hannah stood rigid as always, her son beside her. When the trader reached them, he glanced at the boy and frowned. "This one's sharp," he said. "Too sharp." The overseer shrugged. "Smart ones fetch a price." The trader shook his head slowly. "Not the kind you want." Hannah's breath caught. For the first time in her life, rejection did not mean relief. It meant uncertainty. They moved on. That night, Hannah did not sleep. She understood something she had never understood before. This child was not safe in the same way her others had been unsafe. He would not disappear quietly. He would either be broken, or he would be made an example. And for the first time since her first pregnancy, Hannah allowed herself to feel fear not for loss, but for consequence. She held her son close as the quarters settled into uneasy silence. The plantation had noticed him now. And once a system built on control noticed a mind it could not fully control, it rarely looked away. What would happen next would not depend on strength, but on what the child chose to see and what Hannah chose to protect. The plantation had always believed it understood Hannah. It believed her predictable, measurable, contained. But now there was something it could not calculate, a child who noticed too much, and a mother who had begun, quietly, to remember how it felt to choose. As whispers thickened and eyes lingered longer than before, Hannah realized that survival would no longer come from endurance alone. It would require timing, silence used carefully, and decisions made before permission was ever given. Because the next stage of her life, and her child's, would not be shaped by the fields or the ledger. It would be shaped by what the plantation tried and failed to control. The plantation's attention was not loud. It never needed to be. It arrived quietly, in the reassignment of work, in the sudden interest in Hannah's cabin, in the way her son was asked to stand closer during inspections. Watching Hannah learned was a form of ownership. They wanted to know what kind of boy he would become. At 7 he was sent to work earlier than most children. Not in the fields yet, but near them. Carrying water. Gathering dropped cotton. Standing where he could hear men speak freely, forgetting his presence. Hannah knew this was not kindness. It was testing. The overseer liked to ask questions that were not really questions. Boy, how many rows in that field? Who worked late last night? Which cabin still had a light on? At first the child answered honestly. He did not know that honesty in this place was dangerous. The overseer smiled too often. Good memory, he said. That's useful. Hannah corrected her son that night. Not with anger. With care. You don't always need to answer, she whispered. But he asked. The boy said simply. They always ask, Hannah replied. That don't mean they deserve the truth. The child listened. He began to hesitate before speaking. To pause. To choose words carefully. Hannah saw something change in him, not fear but awareness. He learned to give answers that satisfied without revealing. Enough to seem obedient. Not enough to be useful. Still the watching continued. One afternoon the mistress called Hannah into the house. The big house always smelled different, polished wood, soap, and something bitter beneath it all. Hannah kept her eyes low, her back straight. I hear your boy is clever, the mistress said lightly. Hannah said nothing. They say he remembers everything. That he listens. Silence again. The mistress circled her slowly. You should be proud. Pride, Hannah knew, was not what the woman meant. Smart slaves don't always stay loyal, the mistress continued. They start thinking themselves above their place. Hannah swallowed. He's just a child, she said quietly. The mistress smiled. All of them start as children. That night, Hannah understood something clearly for the first time. Her son was no longer just hers. He was a possibility the plantation wanted to shape, or eliminate. Within weeks, the overseer began assigning the boy small tasks near the house. Delivering messages. Carrying books he could not read but was expected not to touch. Standing silently during conversations that were not meant for him, yet deliberately held within his hearing. They wanted to see what he would absorb. The child absorbed everything. He learned the rhythms of the household. The moods of the mistress. The days when punishment was likely and the days when it was delayed. He learned which doors creaked and which did not. Which men lied poorly and which ones believed their own lies. And slowly he learned something else. He learned that knowledge frightened them. One evening, as Hannah washed clothes by lantern light, her son spoke carefully. They don't like when I know things, he said. Hannah stopped scrubbing. They like when I know what they want, he continued. But not when I know more. Hannah looked at him fully then, not as a child but as something forming too quickly. You must be careful, she said. I am, he replied. I only remember what matters. That sentence stayed with her. What mattered, Hannah realized, was not survival alone anymore. It was direction. She began to prepare him in ways she never had before. Not with reading or writing, those were forbidden. But with memory shaped into purpose. She taught him stories of people who had survived by moving quietly. Of those who had vanished because they were seen too clearly. She taught him how to forget when forgetting was safer. And how to remember when forgetting would cost everything. The plantation, meanwhile, grew impatient. They had tested his usefulness. Now they debated his future. He could be trained, one man said. He could be sold high, said another. He could be trouble, the overseer replied. Hannah overheard none of this, but she felt it. in the tension of the air, in the sudden presence of traitors again, in the way her son was measured with eyes instead of ledgers. The moment of decision came without warning. During a routine inspection, the overseer asked the boy to repeat something he had heard weeks earlier, a conversation about supplies. The boy hesitated. Then he answered incorrectly, deliberately. The overseer's smile vanished. "What?" he snapped. "I don't remember," the boy said calmly. The lie hung between them. The overseer stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You remember everything." The boy looked at the ground. "Not everything." The silence that followed was heavy. Hannah knew in that moment that pretending no longer worked. The plantation had realized what the child could become. And once a system built on control identifies a mind it cannot fully own, it does not wait patiently. It prepares. The plantation did not announce its decisions. It allowed them to unfold. 2 days after the overseer's failed test, Hannah was moved to a different work detail. Lighter labor closer to the house. On the surface it looked like favor. In truth it was proximity. They wanted her close. Her son was reassigned too. No longer running errands freely, he was placed under supervision, paired with older men, watched closely, corrected often. The freedom of movement he once had disappeared quietly, replaced by structure meant to press him into a shape they could manage. Hannah understood the warning. This was the plantation tightening its grip. At night, she lay awake listening to the sounds she had known her entire life. Insects, distant voices, the creak of cabins settling. But beneath it all was something new, a ticking sense of narrowing time. The mistress called her again. This time the tone was softer. "We've been thinking about your boy's future," the woman said, folding her hands as if discussing a favor. "He's clever. Clever boys need guidance." Hannah waited. "He could be trained inside the house," the mistress continued. "Learn discipline, proper habits, serve where he can be useful." Useful. Hannah knew what that meant. The house broke people differently than the fields. It reshaped them into reflections that belonged to someone else. Those who entered young rarely returned whole. "And if he doesn't?" Hannah asked carefully. The mistress's eyes hardened. "Then he'll be sold while he still brings a price." The words were spoken calmly, as if either option was reasonable. Hannah nodded as expected. She thanked the mistress as expected. She returned to her work as expected. But something inside her shifted permanently. That night, she spoke to her son differently than she ever had before. Not in warnings. In truth. "They are deciding what to do with you," she said quietly. The boy listened without fear. "Will they sell me?" he asked. "Yes," Hannah said. "Or they'll keep you close." He thought about that. "Close means watched," he said. "Yes." "And sold means gone." "Yes." He was silent for a long time. "I don't want either," he said finally. Hannah closed her eyes. Neither did she. But wanting had never mattered here. Until now. In the days that followed, Hannah did something she had never done before. She planned. Not openly. Not recklessly. She began by listening more closely to the rhythms she had always known. Which guards drank too much. Which paths were used less often. Which nights the plantation grew careless. She spoke to no one about it. Not even the women who had shared her grief for years. This was not a plan that could survive many voices. Her son sensed the change. "You're thinking louder," he said one evening. Hannah smiled faintly. "You hear too much." He shook his head. "You're not hiding it anymore." She realized then that he was no longer just reacting to the world. He was reading her. The final sign came sooner than expected. A traitor arrived unexpectedly, earlier than planned. The overseer sent word that the boy was to be presented the following morning. Hannah's hands shook for the first time in years. That night she made her choice. Not between good and bad, but between losing her child slowly or risking everything at once. Before dawn she woke him. "Listen carefully," she whispered. "You must do exactly what I say." He did not ask questions. She wrapped food in cloth, tied it securely and pressed it into his hands. "You will follow the creek until it bends twice," she said. "You will walk, not run. You will not speak to anyone unless spoken to first. And you will remember one thing." "What?" he asked. "You are not lost," she said. "You are going forward." The weight of the moment settled between them. "You won't come?" he asked quietly. Hannah swallowed. "I will do what I can," she said. It was the closest to a promise she could make. As the first light crept over the fields, she watched her son disappear into the gray mist between the trees. No shout followed. No alarm yet. Hannah returned to her cabin and waited. When the overseer came, furious and loud, she did not resist. She answered questions vaguely. She accepted punishment without protest. She let them believe what they wanted, that she was desperate, foolish, broken by fear. They never suspected what mattered most, that the child they feared was already beyond their reach, that the woman they underestimated had chosen movement over obedience. As Hannah endured the consequences they delivered, she held one thought close, steady as breath. For the first time in her life, something had left the plantation that did not belong to it. And that change, once made, could not be undone. The plantation did not panic immediately. At first, it dismissed the escape as temporary, a boy wandering off, frightened, certain to return once hunger or fear set in. They had seen it before. Children ran. Children failed. The overseer sent men down the creek path. Dogs followed later. Orders were given calmly, almost lazily, as if certainty itself would pull the child back. Hannah watched none of it. She was confined to her cabin, bruised but unbroken, listening to the sounds of pursuit fade into the distance. Every footstep, every shouted command felt like a test of her resolve. She did not cry. Tears belonged to people who still believed they could beg something back. By the third day the tone changed. The dogs returned confused. The men returned empty-handed. The overseer stopped shouting and started calculating. The boy had not panicked. He had not doubled back. He had not followed the paths most children did. Someone had prepared him. That realization unsettled them more than the escape itself. The mistress ordered Hannah brought to the house again. This time there was no softness. "You planned this," she said flatly. Hannah kept her eyes down. "I'm a mother." The mistress laughed once, short and sharp. "You are property." The distinction in that house mattered. They questioned her for hours. About routes. About accomplices. About intentions she was not allowed to have. Hannah gave them nothing useful. Not because she was strong, but because there was nothing left to take. Her son was gone. Whether he lived or died beyond that point was no longer within their reach. That was the part they could not forgive. Word spread quickly among the enslaved. Not as hope, as awareness. A child had disappeared and not been reclaimed. A woman had acted and survived the act itself. The plantation tightened rules in response. Fewer movements, harsher oversight, but something had already shifted. Fear, once absolute, had fractured. Hannah felt it in small ways. A woman paused before answering a command. A man lingered a second longer before lowering his eyes. Children listened more closely to the stories told at night. Absence had created space. For the overseer, the loss was personal. The boy had been a resource not yet exploited. A mind that could have served. A future prophet that had slipped away. He punished others for it. More work. Less rest. Sudden cruelty meant to restore the balance of power he felt weakening. But power, Hannah understood now, depended on belief. And belief was leaking. At night, alone, Hannah allowed herself to imagine. Not freedom, that was too large. But continuation. She pictured her son walking steadily, using the patience she had taught him. Watching more than acting. Choosing silence when noise would betray him. She did not imagine him safe. She imagined him capable. Weeks passed. No trader spoke of a boy fitting his description. No notices returned him. The plantation stopped searching outward and turned inward instead, suspicious of every quiet glance. The mistress began sleeping poorly. The overseer drank more. They had lost something they could not name fully, control over narrative. They could not point to the boy and say, "This is what happens when you resist." There was no body. No public punishment. No ending they could display. The story remained unfinished. And unfinished stories are dangerous. One evening, Hannah overheard two field hands whispering. "They say he reached the river," one said. "They say he was taken in," said another. "They say nothing," the first corrected. "That's the point." Hannah said nothing. But for the first time since the escape, she allowed herself to feel something close to peace. Not relief, not joy, but balance. She had done what the plantation believed impossible. She had changed the future by removing it from their hands. The cost was heavy. She would never see her son again. She accepted that truth fully. But she also knew something else. She had given him something more valuable than proximity. She had given him direction. As seasons turned, Hannah remained. She worked. She endured. She aged. But the plantation never forgot her. She was watched differently now, not as a breeder, not as labor, but as a woman who had once acted. That knowledge protected her in strange ways. They did not push her too hard. They did not trust her enough to place her close to power again. She existed in a narrow space between punishment and caution. And within that space she taught others quietly, not how to run, but how to think before running, how to prepare without being seen, how to understand that freedom did not always arrive with chains breaking. Sometimes it began with absence, with something no longer where it was expected to be. Hannah's son had become that absence. And the plantation, built on certainty, would never fully recover from the quiet question his disappearance left behind. Years passed, but the plantation never returned to what it had been. It continued, of course. Crops were planted. Orders were given. Punishments were carried out. From the outside, nothing appeared broken. But beneath the routine, something had loosened. Hannah became older in a way that was not measured by years alone. Her body bent more easily under work, yet her presence carried a quiet weight. People noticed when she spoke. They remembered when she stayed silent. She had become a reference point. Not a leader, those were crushed quickly, but a reminder that outcomes were not always what the plantation predicted. New children were born. Hannah watched them with careful eyes. She never spoke of her son directly. Names had power. Absence did not need to be explained. Instead, she told stories that ended early. Stories where someone walked away before the lesson was complete. Where the ending was left open and the listener had to carry it forward. The children understood more than the adults realized. The overseer changed twice. One was sold. Another arrived young, eager, harsh in ways meant to prove authority. But even he felt the difference. Orders were followed, yes, but not with the same internal surrender. People complied, yet withheld something essential. Belief. And without belief, domination was work. Hard work. Hannah saw men pretend not to notice small acts of resistance. A tool left behind. A delay stretched just long enough to matter. Knowledge shared carefully, selectively. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that could be punished easily. The plantation responded by tightening rules again, but it only revealed the truth they refused to face. Control was no longer invisible. It had to be enforced constantly. That made it fragile. One winter evening, a woman new to the field sat beside Hannah during a rare moment of rest. "They say you lost a child," she whispered. Hannah did not answer immediately. "I didn't lose him," she said at last. "I let him go." The woman stared at her, startled by the distinction. Hannah said no more. Years later, rumors filtered back. Never confirmed, never detailed. A man who could read without being taught. A worker who asked questions no one expected. Someone who moved between places with purpose, not desperation. Hannah never claimed those stories. She did not need to. They were not proof. They were continuation. Her body weakened with time. The plantation took from her what it could, strength, speed, certainty, but it could not reclaim the choice she had made. That choice had already multiplied. Hannah understood then what the masters never did. Freedom was not a moment. It was a method. It did not always look like escape. Sometimes it looked like patience, like preparation, like knowing when to act and when to wait. Her son had learned that. So had she. One evening, as the sun sank low and the fields glowed briefly gold, Hannah closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She did not imagine reunion. She imagined impact. That somewhere beyond the plantation, a life existed that had not been counted, not been sold, not been shaped by the same hands that had shaped hers. That was enough. When Hannah finally grew too weak to work, she was allowed to remain in her cabin. Forgotten by the machinery of labor, she existed on the edges, observing, listening, still teaching in small ways. Children sat near her, sensing something steady in her presence. "What should we remember?" one asked her once. Hannah smiled faintly. "Remember that nothing here is forever," she said. "Not even this place." The plantation would outlive her. But it would not outlast what she had started. Because once a system built on certainty loses even one future it expects to own, it begins to crack. Not loudly, not all at once, but in ways that cannot be repaired. Hannah closed her eyes that night knowing this. She had not changed everything. But she had changed enough. And sometimes, enough is how history begins to move.